It started with laughter, the kind of cruel, careless laughter that makes a room colder than silence. Then came the words, sharp as glass, cutting into her like they had been rehearsed. Dr. Evelyn Carter, the first black principal in the district's 100-year history, stood at the center of a long mahogany table while parents whispered, rolled their eyes, and let their disdain spill without shame. She could hear every mutter as if it were shouted. She doesn't belong here. She's only here because of politics. What could she possibly teach our children? They didn't even try to hide it. And for a split second, she thought of her grandmother, the woman who raised her on stories of marching for rights, of drinking from colored-only fountains, of being told again and again to know her place. Yet here Evelyn was, in a navy suit that still smelled faintly of starch, facing a battlefield that looked nothing like Selma but carried the same poison. The parents wanted a fight. They didn't even pretend otherwise. She clenched her hands beneath the table so no one would see them tremble. A man in the front row, a banker with silver hair and the kind of polished arrogance that came from never being told no, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "With all due respect," he said, drawing out the words so slowly they sounded like an insult. "This school has a reputation. Excellence. Tradition. And now, well, forgive me, but some of us are concerned it's being compromised." His gaze slid to her skin, not her credentials. The laughter bubbled again, quiet, poisonous. Evelyn's heart pounded so hard she wondered if the microphone could pick it up. She had been warned this might happen, but warnings never prepare you for the sting of humiliation in real time. The superintendent sat stiffly at the edge of the table, his silence deafening. Not a single board member leaned forward to defend her. She was alone, suspended in the heat of every eye in the room, like a trial without a jury. Evelyn inhaled slowly, remembering what her grandmother used to say, "They will try to bury you with shame. You decide whether you grow roots or break." She told herself not to cry, not to give them the satisfaction of watching her crumble. But her voice would have to rise. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, another parent, this one a woman with a diamond necklace that sparkled almost offensively under the fluorescent lights, raised her hand. "I've heard discipline has become lenient since your arrival," she said, with a sweetness more toxic than the man's smirk. Children from certain backgrounds, she let the pause hang heavy, are being excused more often than they should. We worry that standards are being lowered. The words landed with a thud, thick with the kind of coded language Evelyn had spent her career translating. Certain backgrounds. Standards lowered. The knife wasn't even hidden. It was pressed to her throat. The room murmured approval. A father in the back muttered something about culture problems, earning a round of nods. Evelyn felt the heat crawl up her neck. The humiliation wasn't subtle. It was a performance. They wanted her to flinch, to stumble, to confirm every stereotype with silence. She remembered her first day as principal, walking into the halls with banners still bearing the name of her white predecessor. She had seen the way some teachers stiffened when she shook their hands, the way students whispered, testing her authority. But she also remembered the fifth grader who ran up to her, eyes wide, saying, "You look like me." That single moment had anchored her through every sideways glance, every doubtful comment. That child didn't need her to be perfect. That child needed her to stand. Evelyn lifted her eyes from the table, her hands unclenching slowly. Her grandmother's words echoed again, "Grow roots. Break stone." She had to choose now. If she stayed silent, she'd become the caricature they wanted her to betoken, mistake, outsider. If she spoke, she risked everything. And yet, the silence of the board told her she had already been abandoned. This was her fight alone. The smirking banker cleared his throat, sensing her hesitation. "See," he said, chuckling under his breath, "no answers. Just silence. Maybe it's time we reconsidered what kind of leadership this school really deserves." The laughter spread wider this time, cruel and triumphant. Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief, steadying moment. When she opened them, the golden sunlight pouring through the windows had shifted, landing across her face like a spotlight. It was as if the room had been waiting for her to rise. She straightened her shoulders and placed both palms firmly on the table. The wood was cool beneath her skin, grounding. The laughter still not out of respect, but surprise. Evelyn had been silent long enough for them to mistake her restraint for weakness. Now they would hear her voice, and it would not tremble. "I have been humiliated before," she began, her voice low but carrying. By strangers on the street. By teachers who doubted me. By neighbors who didn't want me in their neighborhoods. But never not once have I been humiliated into silence. The room shifted. Eyes that had mocked her now darted uneasily. Evelyn leaned forward, the golden light sharpening the steel in her gaze. You sit here, speaking of tradition and standards. Do you even hear yourselves? You speak of excellence, yet in the same breath, you lower the bar for your own behavior. You humiliate an educator not for her results, but for her skin. If this is your definition of excellence, then I pity your children. Her words fell like stones into water, sending ripples of discomfort across the room. For the first time, no one laughed. The banker shifted in his seat. The woman with the diamond necklace pressed her lips together. The superintendent blinked, unsure whether to intervene. Evelyn let the silence stretch, heavy and undeniable. She wasn't done. And this time, she wouldn't stop until every whisper had turned to silence. Evelyn let the silence breathe, heavy and awkward, until it wrapped around the room like chains. The parents who had arrived ready to tear her apart now shifted in their seats, realizing they had underestimated her resolve. She had given them their opening act of humiliation, and they had taken it with eager hands. Now it was her turn to write the next act, and she would not waste it. Her voice, when she continued, was stronger, each syllable measured, deliberate, designed to pierce through the prejudice thick in the air. You say tradition, she repeated, her eyes scanning the room, stopping on the smirking banker. But whose tradition? Which children did you build this school to serve? Which families did you welcome in its halls? And more importantly, who was left standing at the gates, told that excellence had no seat for them here? The banker cleared his throat, but did not answer. Neither did the woman with the diamond necklace, nor the father muttering about culture problems. Their silence was an admission louder than words. Evelyn leaned closer to the microphone, her voice a sharp whisper that every corner of the auditorium could hear. Excellence is not a color. It is not a last name. It is not a zip code. It is not a bank account. Excellence is opportunity given, potential nurtured, and effort recognized. If you cannot see that, then it is not my leadership you should question, it is your reflection in the mirror. A hush fell deeper. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum quieter, as if listening. For the first time since the meeting began, Evelyn saw eyes that did not glare but waver. There were parents in that room who had said nothing, who had sat silently, afraid of the louder voices around them. Now, some of them leaned forward, almost unconsciously, drawn to her words. Evelyn caught sight of one mother in the second row, her hands folded tightly, her expression torn between fear and hope. She looked like the kind of parent who had been silenced at these meetings before, who had learned the price of speaking up when the powerful sneered. Evelyn's chest tightened. This wasn't just about defending herself. This was about giving that woman and others like her a voice through hers. She straightened, her eyes never leaving the crowd. Let me tell you a story, she said, her tone shifting, softer but sharper at once. On my first day in this school, I met a student named Malik. He was in 5th grade. Brilliant mind, but angry at a world that kept telling him what he wasn't. Angry because teachers assumed the worst of him before he even opened his mouth. Angry because he had never once been told that he could be great. On that first day, he looked at me, just looked and said, "You look like me." Evelyn's voice cracked, just slightly, before she steadied it again. Do you know what that meant? It meant he saw possibility. He saw that he could stand taller. He saw that the doors you tried to keep locked might finally open for someone like him. That boy is why I am here. That boy is why I will not bend to your humiliation. Because when I look at Malik, I see the future. When you look at him, some of you see only statistics and stereotypes. That is the difference between my leadership and your prejudice. A murmur rose, different this time, unsettled, questioning. The woman with the diamond necklace shifted uncomfortably. The superintendent sat up straighter, as if realizing the tide might be turning. Evelyn let the story hang, knowing it had cut deeper than any statistic or defense of her resume ever could. The banker finally spoke, his voice harsher, tinged with the desperation of someone losing control of the room. With all due respect, Principal Carter, no one here is questioning your passion, but we are questioning results. Discipline, performance, tradition, those are not about race. They are about standards. And frankly, some of us don't think lowering them does our children any favors. His words were met with a smattering of nods, though fewer than before. Evelyn recognized the tactic. When prejudice is called out, it hides behind standards, cloaks itself in concern, and insists its blade is not sharp, just practical. She refused to let him reclaim ground. She stepped away from the table, abandoning the microphone, letting her voice rise naturally in the room. "Standards?" she said, her voice ringing. "You dare speak to me about standards? I have held students in my office while they cried over parents who never came home. I have walked hallways where children carried burdens far heavier than homework burdens you will never touch, never understand. And still, they rise. They pass exams you said they would fail. They write essays that shame your cynicism. They achieve more, not less, because someone finally told them they were capable." She pointed, not at the banker, but at the entire room. "If you want to talk about standards, then let us set the bar higher, not lower. Let us demand compassion alongside discipline. Let us demand opportunity alongside expectation. Let us demand a school where every child, every single one, walks in and knows they belong. That is my standard. And if that frightens you, then the problem is not me. The problem is you." Her words landed like thunder. This time, no one dared to laugh. Even the banker sat frozen, his smirk replaced by a thin line of unease. The golden sunlight had shifted further, now illuminating the parents in the front row, as if casting them in the harsh light of accountability. Evelyn felt her chest rise and fall, her pulse steady now, her fear burned away in the fire of conviction. And then unexpectedly it happened. The quiet mother in the second row raised her hand. Her voice trembled but carried. "She's right," the woman said, her gaze fixed on Evelyn. "My daughter used to come home crying every week because she was treated like she didn't belong here. Since Dr. Carter arrived, she walks through those doors with pride. She believes she can do something with her life. That is a standard I will stand behind." The room shifted again. Whispers spread, but these whispers were not poisoned. They carried uncertainty, cracks in the wall of prejudice. Another parent, this time a father in the back, spoke up. "My son struggled for years. No one cared. She cared. That's the only reason he's still in school." His voice was firm, defiant against the tide that had mocked Evelyn minutes before. The diamond necklace woman looked around, startled by the shift, as if betrayal had bloomed in her ranks. The banker opened his mouth to retort, but Evelyn raised her hand calm, commanding. The room fell silent once more. "I did not come here tonight to fight for my job," she said softly, her voice carrying more weight than when she had shouted. "I came here to fight for your children. All of them. Even the ones you would rather not see. Even the ones you have written off. Because if we do not stand for them, then what are we teaching the ones you protect so fiercely? That excellence is exclusion? That tradition is prejudice dressed in Sunday clothes? That silence in the face of injustice is acceptable? No, not here. Not in this school." Her final words rang with such clarity that even the superintendent leaned back, stunned. The room was motionless, bound not by hostility now, but by the uncomfortable realization that they had been silenced not by force, but by truth. For the first time all evening, Evelyn smiled. It was small, weary, but victorious. She had not broken. She had not bent. She had stood in. The weight of her voice now rested in the hearts of every person in that room. She had been humiliated, yes, but humiliation, she knew, was only the soil where dignity could grow. And in this moment, she had planted something none of them could uproot. The silence after her words was not the same silence that had followed her humiliation. This silence carried weight, carried recognition, carried fear. Not fear of her, but fear of themselves, fear of the reflection she had forced them to look at. Evelyn could see it in their eyes, the flicker of doubt where certainty had once lived. The banker finally leaned back in his chair, his polished confidence faltering. He tapped his pen against the table, a nervous rhythm he probably didn't even notice. "This is emotional," he muttered, his tone stripped of its earlier smugness. "But emotions don't run schools. Numbers do. Results do." Evelyn almost smiled at the desperation in his pivot. She had seen this before, prejudice trying to hide behind objectivity, bias cloaked as data. She stepped closer, meeting his eyes without flinching. "Then let's talk numbers," she said evenly. "Graduation rates among Black and Latino students have risen 12% since I arrived. Suspensions have dropped because we've invested in counseling instead of punishment. And test scores across every grade have climbed, not fallen. Those are results. Those are numbers. The only thing that hasn't risen here is your willingness to admit that a black woman could achieve them. The words struck with surgical precision. Parents shifted, some nodding reluctantly, others refusing to meet her gaze. The banker looked cornered, but Evelyn did not let him recover. You want to use numbers as a shield? Then own them all. Own the fact that before I arrived, students of color were 3 times more likely to be suspended than their white peers for the same behavior. Own the fact that kids were tracked into lower-level classes based on nothing but bias. Own the fact that your so-called tradition was exclusion dressed up as excellence. That is your legacy. These children deserve better. The superintendent, who had sat frozen for most of the meeting, finally stirred. His voice was hesitant, but there was a tremor of awakening in it. She's right, he said quietly, almost to himself at first. Then louder. The data supports what she's saying. The shift was seismic. To hear even a sliver of acknowledgement from authority cracked the dam further. The woman with the diamond necklace whispered something sharp to the parent beside her, but Evelyn caught the unease flickering in her eyes. Power was slipping from their hands, and they knew it. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She turned away from the board table and faced the full audience. Let me ask you something, she said, her voice softer now, drawing them closer. What do you want your children to remember from this moment? Do you want them to remember that their parents fought to keep a principal out because of the color of her skin? Or do you want them to remember that when prejudice came knocking, you chose courage over comfort? Because make no mistake, your children are watching. They will carry your choices into their lives. And one day, when they face injustice, they will act based on the lesson you taught them here. The room shifted again. The quiet mother in the second row sat taller. The father in the back crossed his arms, his nod visible now. Even some of the parents who had muttered earlier looked down at their hands, as if ashamed. The golden light streaming through the windows seemed almost to pulse brighter, catching dust motes in the air like sparks. Evelyn felt the atmosphere changing, like a tide pulling away from the rocks of hatred. The banker tried again, though his voice was brittle now. You're making this too much about race. Schools should be colorblind. Evelyn's laugh was short, sharp, and utterly humorless. Colorblind, she repeated. That's a convenient word, isn't it? You mean ignore. Pretend. Look away. Children don't need us to be colorblind. They need us to see them, all of them, for who they are, in the fullness of their identity, and still give them everything we would want for our own. I am not here to make this school colorblind. I am here to make it just. Applause broke out. It wasn't thunderous, not yet, but it was real. A few parents clapped, hesitantly at first, then stronger, until the sound filled the air. The banker sat stunned, his arguments crumbling beneath the swell of support Evelyn had fought for word by word. The superintendent raised a hand, trying to regain control of the meeting. I think, he began, but Evelyn cut him off, not rudely, but firmly, with the authority of someone who had finally seized the ground she deserved. No, she said. You've had silence long enough. Let me finish. The room fell still again. Evelyn took a breath, gathering every ounce of memory, pain, and hope she carried. I know what it is to be humiliated, she said, her tone steady but raw. I know what it is to walk into rooms where people have already decided who you are. I know what it is to be told you don't belong. But I also know what it is to rise anyway. I know what it is to carry the dreams of generations who fought for a seat at the table. And I know what it is to refuse to let hate define me. Tonight, you tried to humiliate me. But you cannot humiliate someone who knows her worth. And you cannot silence someone who speaks with truth. She let the final words hang, her chest rising and falling, the golden light almost haloing her in the center of the room. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the quiet mother rose to her feet. Her applause was loud, defiant. The father in the back stood too. One by one, others followed, not all, but enough. The sound filled the space, drowning out the mutters, drowning out the hate. Evelyn stood in the center, not triumphant, not smug, but resolute. She had not come to win applause. She had come to shift the ground beneath their feet. And she had. The banker sat stiffly, his jaw tight, his pen motionless. The woman with the diamond necklace clutched her purse like a lifeline. The old guard of prejudice had not vanished, they never did, but they had been forced into silence, stripped of their certainty. The superintendent, still sitting, looked at Evelyn with something new in his eyes. Respect. Belated, but real. When the applause finally faded, Evelyn spoke once more, quieter now. "This meeting is adjourned," she said. "But this work is not. The work continues tomorrow, in the classrooms, in the hallways, in the way we treat each child who walks through our doors. I will not stop, and neither should you." She stepped back from the microphone, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her spirit unbroken. The golden light shifted once more, painting the room in warmth as if sealing the moment in memory. Evelyn knew the fight was not over. Prejudice did not fall in a single meeting. But tonight, she had shown them something undeniable. She would not be humiliated into silence. She would speak, she would stand, and she would not move. As the parents filed out, some avoiding her eyes, some nodding in quiet gratitude, Evelyn stood tall. She thought again of Malik, of his words, "You look like me." She thought of her grandmother, who had marched so Evelyn could stand here now. And she thought of the children who would one day sit in this same room, fighting battles of their own. For them, she would keep fighting. For them, she would never stop. Because silence, she knew, was the real humiliation. And that, she would never accept. The applause had ended, the parents had filed out, and the room was empty but for the echo of her words. Evelyn stood alone at the long mahogany table, her palms flat against its polished surface. The golden light that had framed her victory was fading into dusk, the last rays stretching like tired arms across the floor. She was exhausted not just in body, but in soul. She had spoken with every ounce of strength she carried, but she knew this was only the beginning. A battle won was not the same as a war ended. The superintendent approached cautiously, his expression unreadable. "Dr. Carter," he said softly, "you surprised them tonight." He hesitated, then added, "You surprised me." Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "I didn't come here to surprise," she said. "I came here to do my job." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded once, as if conceding ground he'd held too long. "The board will have to meet again, formally. But after tonight, I think you'll find fewer voices against you." Evelyn allowed herself the smallest smile. It wasn't victory. It was breathing space. But sometimes, breathing space was all you needed to prepare for the next climb. That night, when she finally returned home, she found herself sitting at her kitchen table, the room quiet but for the hum of the refrigerator. She thought of her grandmother, of Malik, of every child who had looked at her and seen not just a principle, but a possibility. She wanted to believe the meeting had changed things. But a voice inside whispered, "Tomorrow, they will come again. Tomorrow, they will find new words, new weapons." And she would have to stand again. Days passed. The story of the meeting spread, first in whispers, then in louder conversations. Teachers spoke of it in break rooms. Parents debated it in grocery store aisles. Students repeated it in hallways with the exaggerations of youth. Some called her brave. Some called her defiant. Some, still bitter, called her dangerous. Evelyn ignored the labels. What mattered was the shift. She could feel small, tentative, but real. One afternoon, a knock came at her office door. It was the quiet mother from the second row, the one who had stood up when no one else dared. She carried a bouquet of sunflowers, their yellow petals glowing like miniature suns. "For you," she said, her voice still trembling but stronger now. "For what you did." Evelyn accepted them with tears pricking her eyes. "I didn't do it alone," she said. "You stood too." The woman shook her head. "I only stood because you gave me the courage. My daughter hasn't stopped talking about you. She said she wants to be a teacher now. She said, if Principal Carter can do it, maybe I can too." Her smile wavered, but it was there. That's worth more than anything. Evelyn placed the flowers on her desk, their bright faces turning toward the window where sunlight streamed in. She realized then that change was not a thunderclap. It was a seed, planted quietly, watered slowly, growing in places you could not always see. But not everyone welcomed the growth. A week later, an anonymous letter arrived at her office. The handwriting was jagged, the words venomous. It accused her of destroying tradition, of pandering, of lowering the school's worth. It ended with 4 words that chilled her. "You don't belong here." For a moment, Evelyn's hands shook as she held the paper. The humiliation of that meeting washed back over her like a wave. But then she looked again at the sunflowers on her desk, still blooming strong. She thought of Malik, of the girl who wanted to be a teacher, of every student who had walked taller because of her presence. She tore the letter in half, then in quarters, then in pieces so small they became confetti. "I belong," she whispered to the empty room. "And I will stay." The true test came a month later, when the board convened again. The same parents filled the same seats, their faces stern, their whispers sharp. Evelyn felt the weight of déjà vu, but this time, something was different. Scattered throughout the crowd were parents who had once been silent, but now sat ready, their eyes meeting hers with quiet strength. The banker was there, of course, his smirk carefully reconstructed. The woman with the diamond necklace sparkled under the lights, her lips pressed thin. They still thought they could overpower her. They still thought humiliation could drive her out. But Evelyn no longer stood alone. When the banker launched into another speech about standards and tradition, a father in the back interrupted him. "We've heard enough of that. The numbers speak for themselves. My kid is thriving under her leadership. That's all that matters." Murmurs of agreement rippled. When the diamond necklace woman complained about lowered discipline, the quiet mother rose again. "My daughter is disciplined," she said firmly. "She's also respected. That's more than I can say for how she was treated before." And when the banker finally spat, "This is about who belongs in this community." Evelyn stood, calm but unyielding. "Every child belongs," she said. "And if you cannot accept that, then perhaps it is you who does not belong in this conversation." The room erupted not in laughter this time, but in applause. Stronger, louder, undeniable. The board members shifted uncomfortably, realizing the balance of power had shifted. The superintendent cleared his throat, then spoke with rare firmness. "Dr. Carter stays," he announced, "and she leads." The applause swelled, filling the room with sound so fierce it shook Evelyn to her core. She stood tall, her chest rising with the weight of generations who had fought for this moment. She thought again of her grandmother, of marches and chants and sacrifices. She thought of Malik, of children whose futures would be different because she refused to bend. Humiliation had been their weapon, but dignity had been her shield, and truth had been her sword. As the meeting adjourned, parents approached her, some to thank, some to apologize, some simply to stand in quiet solidarity. The banker and the diamond necklace woman left quickly, their power drained. Evelyn did not gloat. She only breathed, deeply, as if inhaling a future that finally tasted freer. That evening, as she walked through the school halls, the last of the sunlight poured through the windows, painting everything in gold. Students passed her, some waving shyly, some running to their after-school clubs, their laughter echoing. Evelyn paused, letting the warmth bathe her face. She whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to the walls, to the history, to the future, "We belong." And in that moment, under the fading golden light, she knew the truth. Humiliation could silence the weak, but resilience, the kind born from generations of struggle, could silence even the loudest prejudice. She had been humiliated once. She would never be humiliated again, because she was more than a principle. She was a promise, and promises, when kept, change the world. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.